Kim Tae-ho wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked the mining equipment one last time. The deep space colony on Kepler 442b was hot, dusty, and far from home. But it was honest work, and the pay was good enough to send money back to his family on Earth. "Hey, Tae-ho, you ready to head back?" called Park So-min from across the mining platform. She was loading the last of the rare earth minerals into transport containers. Her face was dirty, but she smiled like always. So-min never let the hard work get her down. "Almost done," Tae-ho replied, running one final check on the extraction drill. As the chief engineer, he made sure everything was working right before they left each day. Safety was important when you were this far from help. Lee Dong-woo was already at the transport ship, warming up the engines. He was their pilot, and a good one. Dong-woo could fly through asteroid fields like they were empty space. Tae-ho trusted him with his life every day. The three of them had worked together for 2 years now. They knew each other well. So-min told jokes when things got tough. Dong-woo was quiet, but reliable. Tae-ho kept them all safe with his careful planning. They were a good team. "Transport ready," Dong-woo's voice came through their communication devices. "Weather looks clear for the trip back to the station." Tae-ho sealed the mining equipment and walked toward the ship. The sun was setting over the rocky landscape. In a few hours, they would be back at the orbital station, eating hot food and sleeping in real beds. Tomorrow they would do it all again. But tomorrow never came. The attack happened without warning. One moment they were flying through empty space toward the station. The next moment, their ship was surrounded by vessels unlike anything Tae-ho had ever seen. The alien ships were black and smooth, with strange blue lights pulsing along their sides. "What are those?" So-min whispered, staring out the window. Dong-woo's hands flew over the controls. "I don't know, but they're jamming our communications. I can't reach the station." The alien ships moved closer. They were much bigger than the human transport. Tae-ho could see strange symbols glowing on their hulls. His heart started beating faster. This was not a friendly meeting. A voice filled their ship. It spoke in perfect English, but there was something cold about it. The words came from everywhere at once. "Human vessel. You will shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in death. Who are you?" Dong-woo shouted at the communication system. "This is human space. You have no right to—" A blue beam shot from one of the alien ships. It hit their engines, and the transport shook violently. Warning lights flashed red all over the control panel. "Engines are dead," Dong-woo said, his voice tight with fear. "We're not going anywhere." Through the windows, they could see smaller alien ships approaching. These looked like boarding pods. Tae-ho's mind raced. He thought about the emergency weapons locker, but what good would human guns do against technology like this? "We should surrender," So-min said quietly. "Maybe they just want our cargo." But Tae-ho knew better. He had seen the way the alien ships moved, like predators surrounding prey. This was not about cargo. This was about them. The boarding pod attached to their ship with a loud clang. They heard cutting sounds as the aliens burned through their hull. In minutes, the airlock door melted away like hot metal. The creatures that stepped onto their ship were tall and thin, with pale skin that looked almost transparent. They wore armor that seemed to be made of crystal, and their eyes glowed with a soft blue light. Most frightening of all, they moved without making any sound. One of them pointed a weapon at the three humans. It looked like a rod of twisted metal, but energy danced along its surface. "You are now prisoners of the Valthari Empire," the alien said. Its voice was the same cold tone they had heard before. "You will come with us." "Why?" Tae-ho asked. "What do you want from us?" The alien tilted its head, like it was surprised by the question. "You are resources. You will work until you die. This is the way of conquered species." So-min grabbed Tae-ho's arm. "Conquered? What are you talking about? Earth has treaties with... Earth no longer exists as a free world, the alien said. Your outer colonies have fallen. Your military has been destroyed. You are the last humans we need to collect from this sector. The words hit Tae-ho like a physical blow. Earth conquered, the colonies fallen. It was impossible. Humanity had ships, weapons, technology. How could they lose so completely? But as the aliens forced them off their ship and onto the boarding pod, Tae-ho saw the truth in the distance. The orbital station was on fire. Pieces of human ships floated in space like broken toys. Everything they had built here was being destroyed. The alien ship was huge inside, with corridors that stretched farther than Tae-ho could see. The walls were smooth and white, with those same blue lights running along them like veins. The air smelled strange, like metal and electricity. They passed other prisoners being moved through the corridors. Tae-ho saw beings he did not recognize. Creatures with fur, others with scales, some that looked like walking rocks. All of them had the same empty look in their eyes. All of them wore metal collars around their necks. So many species, Somin whispered. The Valthari have conquered this galaxy for 1,000 years, said one of their guards, who seemed to enjoy explaining their hopelessness. You humans lasted longer than most. 3 months from first contact to total surrender. The Kelari only lasted 6 days. They were brought to a processing room where other aliens waited with strange machines. These aliens were different, smaller, with multiple arms and insect-like faces. They moved quickly and efficiently, like they had done this many times before. Processing forms 447, 448, and 449, one of them said in a clicking voice. Standard, mining colony workers. Assigned to heavy labor detail. Tae-ho felt something cold press against the back of his neck. There was a sharp pain, and then a strange numbness spread through his body. He wanted to fight, to run, to do something, but his muscles would not obey him. Neural inhibitor installed, the insect-like alien reported. Subject is now compliant. The same thing happened to So-min and Dong-woo. Tae-ho watched helplessly as his friends' faces went blank. The fighting spirit left their eyes, replaced by dull acceptance. But something was wrong with Tae-ho's inhibitor. He could still think clearly, still feel angry. He just could not move his body the way he wanted to. He decided to hide this. He made his face look as empty as the others. They were given gray prison clothes and metal collars with glowing numbers. Then they were marched to a holding area filled with hundreds of other prisoners. The room was dark and smelled of unwashed bodies and despair. As Tae-ho sat on the cold floor, he looked around at the other humans. Some he recognized from the colony. Others must have come from different places. All of them stared at nothing, with dead eyes. But Tae-ho's eyes were not dead. Behind his blank expression, his mind was working. The aliens had made a mistake with his neural inhibitor. They thought he was broken like the others. They were wrong. And someday, Tae-ho promised himself, they would learn just how wrong they were. The prison ship was called Torment's Edge, and Tae-ho understood why within the first hour. Everything about the ship was designed to break the spirit of its prisoners. The corridors were too narrow, the ceilings too low, and the lights too bright. The air was always too hot or too cold, never comfortable. Tae-ho learned about the ship's hierarchy quickly. At the top were the Valthari guards, with their crystal armor and glowing eyes. They rarely spoke to prisoners directly. Instead, they used other alien species to control the ship. The Zephyrians were beings made of gas and energy who controlled the air systems. They could make the air thick and hard to breathe, or thin enough to make prisoners pass out. Tae-ho saw them punish a group of furry creatures by slowly removing oxygen from their cell. The creatures begged and gasped until they collapsed. The Krillian hunters were worse. They looked like giant insects with sharp claws and too many eyes. They tracked down prisoners who tried to escape or cause trouble. Tejo watched them drag away a prisoner who had been caught stealing food. The screams echoed through the ship for hours, but the worst guards were members of conquered species who had given up hope. They had been prisoners so long that they now served their captors willingly. These beings knew exactly how to hurt their own kind because they remembered being hurt the same way. Humans were at the bottom of everything. The other prisoners looked down on them because humans were new to being conquered. They had not learned to survive like the others. They were weak, short-lived, and stupid according to everyone else on the ship. "You learn fast, or you die fast," said Nam Su-jin, a human woman who had been on the ship for 2 years. She was thin and scarred, but her eyes were still alive. "The Valthari think we are animals, good for heavy work, but nothing else." Su-jin had been captured when her research station was attacked. She had watched the aliens kill her colleagues and destroy years of scientific work. Now she cleaned waste recycling systems and counted herself lucky to be alive. "The neural inhibitors make us weak," she explained quietly as they worked together in the reactor maintenance area. "They stop us from getting angry or fighting back. They also make us stupid so we cannot plan escapes." Tejo nodded and pretended to be dull like the others. But inside, his mind was sharp. His damaged inhibitor let him think and feel everything. He just had to be careful not to show it. The work was dangerous and painful. Humans were assigned to jobs that exposed them to radiation, toxic chemicals, and extreme temperatures. The aliens did not care if humans died, because there were always more prisoners coming from conquered worlds. Tejo worked in the reactor core with 5 other humans. The radiation slowly cooked them from the inside. 2 of the workers had been there for 6 months. Their skin was gray and their hair was falling out. They would be dead soon, and the aliens would replace them with fresh prisoners. "Why do they keep us alive at all?" asked Choi Min-ho, a former soldier who now carried heavy equipment. His military training was useless here. The inhibitor made him move slowly and think simply. "Because dead slaves do not work," Su-jin replied. "They give us just enough food and medicine to keep us functional. When we break down, they throw us away." Tejo learned that the ship carried 3,000 prisoners from dozens of different species. Most had been traveling for months or years toward the Valthari homeworlds, where they would work in mines and factories until they died. The aliens had perfected this system over centuries. They knew exactly how much pain each species could handle before breaking completely. They knew which punishments worked best on which beings. They had turned cruelty into a science. But Tejo noticed something the aliens had missed. Humans were different from the other species in ways the Valthari did not understand. The Kalari prisoners had given up hope completely. They sat in their cells and waited to die. The Roxani prisoners followed rules perfectly and never caused trouble. The Thek prisoners were so broken they could barely remember their own names. But humans adapted. Even with neural inhibitors slowing their minds, they found ways to make their lives slightly better. They shared food when they could. They helped each other with difficult work. They told stories and jokes in whispers when the guards were not listening. Yoon Ha-na was a medical officer who had been captured 3 months ago. The inhibitor had damaged her memory, but she still tried to help sick prisoners. She could not remember complex medical procedures, but she knew how to clean wounds and ease pain. Jang Ki-woo had been a communications specialist. He could not operate complex equipment anymore, but he was good at listening. He heard things. The guards said when they thought no prisoners were paying attention. He learned about ship schedules and guard rotations. Even Dong-woo and So-min, his friends from the mining colony, showed small signs of fighting back. Dong-woo would sometimes take longer paths when moving equipment, forcing the guards to walk farther. So-min would accidentally spill cleaning chemicals on the most cruel guards' boots. These were tiny acts of rebellion, but they were still rebellion. The Valthari expected complete submission from conquered species. They got it from most prisoners. But humans were stubborn in ways that were hard to see. Tejo began to pay attention to the ship's systems while he worked. As an engineer, he understood machines even with his thinking slowed down. He noticed that the prison ship was old and not well maintained. The aliens were confident that their prisoners could never threaten them, so they did not worry about security flaws. The neural inhibitor control system ran through the main computer network. The power systems had backup generators that could be manually controlled. The communication arrays could be accessed from maintenance tunnels that prisoners cleaned every day. Slowly, carefully, Tejo began to form a plan. It was dangerous and probably impossible, but it was better than waiting to die from radiation poisoning in the reactor core. The aliens thought humans were broken animals. They were about to learn that broken animals could still bite. One night, as he lay on his thin sleeping mat, Tejo whispered to Bayek Ji-hoon, who slept next to him. Ji-hoon had been a Marine before capture. His inhibitor made him slow and confused, but Tejo could see intelligence still flickering in his eyes. Ji-hoon, Tejo whispered carefully. Do you remember who you used to be? Ji-hoon turned his head slowly. For a moment, his eyes focused clearly. I remember some things, he whispered back. Why? Because someday we might need to remember how to fight. Ji-hoon stared at him for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly. I will try to remember. It was a small start, but it was a start. The aliens had made one crucial mistake when they designed their perfect prison ship. They had assumed that broken spirits could never heal, but humans healed from everything, given enough time and reason. And Tejo was going to give them both. The accident happened during routine maintenance in the reactor core. Tejo was checking coolant lines when a power surge shot through the system. Electricity arced across the maintenance panel, and several neural inhibitor control circuits overloaded. The pain was incredible. It felt like lightning was running through Tejo's skull. He fell to the floor, shaking and unable to breathe. For a moment, he thought he was dying. Then something changed. The constant fog in his mind suddenly lifted. The heavy weight that had been pressing down on his thoughts disappeared. For the first time in months, Tejo could think clearly. He could feel everything. Anger at being captured, rage at watching his friends turned into empty shells, fury at the aliens who thought humans were animals. The emotions hit him like a physical force, and he had to bite his tongue to keep from screaming. But Tejo was smart. He had always been smart, but now his mind was working at full speed again. He realized immediately that he had to hide this change. If the guards discovered his neural inhibitor was damaged, they would fix it or kill him. He lay still for several minutes, pretending to be unconscious. Around him, other workers continued their tasks with slow, mechanical movements. None of them had noticed what happened. Their own inhibitors kept them from caring about anything except the work. When Tejo finally stood up, he made sure to move slowly and keep his face blank. Inside, his thoughts were racing, but outside he looked the same as always. He finished his maintenance tasks and returned to the holding area with the other prisoners. That night, Tejo lay on his sleeping mat and really looked at his fellow humans for the first time in months. What he saw broke his heart. These were not the same people who had been captured with him. The neural inhibitors had turned them into living ghosts, but he also saw something else. Small signs that the human spirit was not completely dead. Dongwu still tapped rhythms on his leg, the same way he used to do when flying. So-min still braided her hair carefully each morning, maintaining one small piece of dignity. These tiny habits showed that some part of them was still fighting to survive. The next day, Tejo began paying closer attention to everything around him. With his mind clear, he could see patterns and opportunities that had been invisible before. He noticed that certain guards were lazy and did not check prisoner work carefully. He saw that some areas of the ship were rarely monitored. Most importantly, he realized that other prisoners had neural inhibitors that were starting to malfunction. The ship was old, and the inhibitor system was not perfect. Small damage accumulated over time. Stress and poor maintenance caused random failures. Usually the guards caught these problems quickly and fixed them, but sometimes prisoners hid the changes long enough for their minds to start recovering. Tae-ho identified 3 other humans whose inhibitors seemed to be weakening. One was Baek Ji-hoon, the former Marine he had spoken to before. Ji-hoon was starting to move with more purpose and awareness. His military training was slowly coming back. Another was Oh Eun-seo, a young woman who had been an engineer like Tae-ho. She was beginning to show interest in the machines she cleaned, studying them instead of just wiping them down. Her technical knowledge was returning piece by piece. The third was Kang Hyun-woo, a man who had been completely broken for months. He had not spoken or shown emotion since his capture. But lately, Tae-ho noticed him watching the guards with calculating eyes. Something dangerous was waking up inside him. Tae-ho knew he had to be very careful about making contact with these people. The guards watched for signs of prisoner cooperation or planning. Too much talking between prisoners would attract attention. Instead, he used the same subtle methods he had learned from Nam Soo-jin. A gesture while working, a whispered word during meal distribution. Small signals that could mean nothing to watching guards but carried meaning to someone who was looking for them. The breakthrough came when Eun-seo found him during a maintenance shift. She was supposed to be cleaning air filters, but she had taken a longer route that brought her near the reactor core. "The power coupling in Section 7 is damaged," she said quietly, pretending to wipe down a control panel. "I could fix it, but I would need better tools." Tae-ho looked at her carefully. Her eyes were focused and intelligent. Her inhibitor was definitely failing. "What kind of tools?" he asked, keeping his voice flat and emotionless. "The kind that could cause electromagnetic pulses if used incorrectly," Eun-seo replied. "Very dangerous for sensitive electronic equipment." Tae-ho understood immediately. She was talking about building an EMP device that could disable neural inhibitors. It was risky and probably impossible with the materials available to prisoners, but it was also the first real hope they had had since capture. "Such tools would be very dangerous," Tae-ho said. "A prisoner could be hurt badly if they did not know how to use them." "Yes," Eun-seo agreed. "That prisoner would need to practice first, maybe with less sensitive equipment." They were talking about testing the EMP device on inhibitors that were already failing. If it worked, they could begin freeing other prisoners systematically. If it failed, they would probably die. That night, Tae-ho made a decision that would change everything. He approached Ji-hoon during the few minutes when guards changed shifts and the holding area was not directly monitored. "How much do you remember about being a soldier?" he whispered. Ji-hoon looked at him for a long moment. "More every day," he replied quietly. "Why?" "Because we might need to remember how to be human again." Ji-hoon's eyes showed understanding. "When?" "Soon." "Are you ready to take risks?" "I have been ready since the day they put this collar on me," Ji-hoon said, touching the metal device around his neck. "What do you need me to do?" "Find Hyun-woo. See if he remembers anything useful. But be careful. If the guards notice us talking too much—" "I know," Ji-hoon said. "I will be careful." Over the next few days, a small network began to form. Eun-seo worked on building her EMP device from salvaged parts and broken equipment. Ji-hoon carefully assessed which prisoners might be ready to fight when the time came. Tae-ho studied the ship's systems and guard routines, looking for weaknesses they could exploit. The most difficult part was approaching Hyun-woo. He had been silent for so long that other prisoners thought he was completely broken. But when Ji-hoon finally made contact, they discovered that Hyun-woo had been awake and aware for weeks. He had just been very good at hiding it. "I remember everything," Hyunwoo told them in a voice like ice. Every beating, every humiliation, every friend who died while I was helpless to save them. Are you ready to do something about it? Taeho asked. Hyunwoo's smile was terrifying. I have been planning for months. I know exactly which guards I want to kill first. It was frightening and encouraging at the same time. The neural inhibitors had not just been suppressing their ability to fight back. They had been suppressing everything that made humans dangerous. All that rage and intelligence and stubborn refusal to give up had been building pressure like water behind a dam. When the dam finally broke, Taeho realized the flood was going to be devastating. Yoon Seo finished her first EMP device 3 days later. It was crude and small, built from reactor components and broken tools, but it worked. When she tested it on her own failing inhibitor, the device died completely. For the first time in months, Yoon Seo was completely free. The change was immediate and dramatic. Her posture straightened, her eyes became sharp and focused. Most importantly, she smiled like a predator. When do we start freeing the others? She asked. Taeho looked around at the hundreds of human prisoners in the holding area. Most of them were still lost in the fog of neural suppression, but some were beginning to show signs of awareness. Some were ready to remember what they used to be. Tonight, he said, we start tonight. The first person they freed was Lim Ye-jin, a doctor who had been captured from a medical station. Her neural inhibitor had been malfunctioning for days, but she was still struggling against the mental fog. When Yoon Seo's EMP device completely disabled the implant, the change was incredible. Ye-jin sat up straight, blinked several times, and then began to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief. For the first time in 8 months, she could remember her medical training clearly. She could think about complex procedures and treatments. Most importantly, she could feel hope again. How many others can? We free safely? She asked, wiping tears from her eyes. That depends on you, Taeho replied. We need to know who is strong enough to handle the shock of getting their minds back. Ye-jin nodded and began examining other prisoners quietly. As a doctor, she could check their health without attracting guard attention. She looked for signs of mental resilience and physical strength. Some prisoners had been broken too badly by months of abuse. Freeing them suddenly might cause them to break down completely. Start with the younger ones, she advised, and people who still show small signs of rebellion. Their minds are more likely to recover quickly. Over the next week, they built a careful network. Yoon Seo created 3 more EMP devices using parts that Ji-hoon and Hyunwoo stole during work shifts. They freed 1 or 2 prisoners each night, always during the shift changes when guard attention was focused elsewhere. Each newly freed human brought special knowledge and skills. Han Jae-sung had been a security officer before capture. He knew about surveillance systems and guard procedures. Song Mi-young had been a pilot who understood navigation and ship operations. Ko Seong-ho was an electrician who could work with the ship's power systems. But the most important addition was Nam Soo-jin. She had survived on the ship longer than any other human, and her inhibitor had been slowly failing for weeks. When they finally freed her completely, she became their guide to the ship's hidden secrets. There are things the guards do not know about this ship, Soo-jin explained during a secret meeting in an unused storage area. Maintenance tunnels that connect different sections, emergency systems that bypass normal controls, places where prisoners can hide if they need to. She also knew about the other species on the ship. The Kalari were completely broken and would not help, but they would not betray the humans either. The Roxani followed rules perfectly, which meant they would report suspicious activity if they saw it. The Thek were unpredictable and dangerous even to other prisoners. But there are also species the Valthari think are extinct, Soo-jin said quietly. Beings they captured years ago and forgot about. Some of them might still have fight left in them. This was the breakthrough Taeho had been hoping for. The humans were not alone on this ship. If they could contact other species and share their method for disabling neural inhibitors, they might be able to start a real rebellion. The first contact came through Moon Jun-ho, a quiet man who had been a librarian before capture. His job was cleaning the archives where the ship stored information about different species. While working there, he met a creature called a Vectar. The Vectar looked like a large spider made of metal and crystal. According to ship records, the entire species had been wiped out 5 years ago, but this one had been kept alive as a curiosity. The Valthari thought it was harmless because its neural inhibitor had been active for so long, but Junho realized the creature was trying to communicate. It was tapping patterns on the walls that seemed like code. When Junho tapped back, the Vectar became excited and began showing him hidden messages scratched into metal surfaces. It has been keeping records, Junho reported to the growing human network. Names of guards, shift schedules, weakness in the ship's systems. It has been planning revenge for years. SEO Hye-won, who had been a communications specialist, worked with Junho to establish real communication with the Vectar. They learned that its name was something like skittering death in shadows, which the humans shortened to Skitter. Skitter told them about other extinct species hidden throughout the ship. A group of energy beings the Valthari thought were dead. Rock creatures who had been pretending to be statues for months. Even some Kelari who were not as broken as they appeared. The ship is not as secure as the guards believe, Skitter communicated through careful tapping. Many prisoners have been planning, waiting for the right moment. You humans might be that moment. The network began spreading beyond just humans. Yunseo modified her EMP devices to work on different types of neural inhibitors. Some species required different approaches, but the basic principle was the same. Disable the control device, and the mind could begin to heal, but they had to be very careful. The Valthari were not stupid. If too many prisoners began acting differently at once, the guards would investigate. The rebellion had to spread slowly and secretly. An Da-un, who had been an actress before capture, taught the freed prisoners how to act like they were still controlled. She showed them how to move slowly and keep their faces blank while actually being alert and aware. It was like performing in a play where the audience would kill you if they realized you were acting. The key is to remember that you are always being watched, she explained. Every gesture and expression must be perfect. The guards expect to see empty, broken prisoners. That is exactly what we will show them. Meanwhile, Taeho and his core team planned the next phase of their rebellion. They now had nearly 30 freed humans and contacts with prisoners from 6 other species. But they needed more than just free minds. They needed weapons, tools, and most importantly, a way to take control of the ship. Ro Tae-woon, a former engineer, had been studying the ship's computer systems during his cleaning duties. He discovered that the Valthari used a centralized control network for almost everything. Environmental systems, gravity, communications, even the neural inhibitor network all ran through the same computers. If we could get access to the main computer core, he explained, we could potentially disable every neural inhibitor on the ship at once. We could also control life support, artificial gravity, even the engines. But the computer core was in the most heavily guarded section of the ship. It was protected by multiple security systems and watched by the most elite Valthari guards. Getting there would require a major distraction. We need to make the guards look somewhere else, Ji-hoon said during one of their planning meetings. Something big enough to draw their attention away from critical systems. Hyun-woo smiled his cold smile. I have some ideas about that. The plan they developed was complex and dangerous. It would require precise timing and coordination between prisoners all over the ship. If anything went wrong, they would all die. But if it worked, they would turn the Valthari's own prison ship into a weapon of liberation. As the network prepared for their uprising, Tejo thought about how much had changed since his capture. Months ago, he had been a simple mining engineer who just wanted to do his job and go home. Now he was planning the largest prisoner rebellion in Valthari history. The aliens had wanted to break the human spirit and turn them into obedient slaves. Instead, they had created something much more dangerous. They had given humans time to adapt, learn, and plan. They had put hundreds of clever, determined people in the same place and given them a common enemy. Most importantly, they had underestimated what humans could become when they had nothing left to lose. The rebellion was ready to begin. And when it started, the screams would echo through every corridor of the ship. But this time, the screams would not be coming from the prisoners. The plan started to fall apart when Ro Tae-woon was caught during a routine inspection. A Krillian guard found him with a disabled neural inhibitor and immediately began interrogation. The insect-like creature used pain devices and mind probes, trying to learn how many other prisoners were involved in the rebellion. Tae-woon said nothing. Even under torture that would have broken most beings, he kept the network's secrets. But his capture meant the guards were now looking for other problems. Random inspections increased. Security became tighter. The rebellion had to move faster than planned. "We have maybe one day before they find the rest of us," Ji-hoon warned during an emergency meeting. "If we are going to act, it has to be now." Tae-ho felt the weight of command settling on his shoulders. Hundreds of prisoners were counting on his decisions. If he moved too quickly, they would fail and die. If he waited too long, the guards would discover them and kill them anyway. Tonight, he decided. During the third shift change when security is weakest, we hit multiple targets at once, so they cannot respond to everything. The rebellion began at exactly 0300 ship time. Hyun-woo and his team struck first, attacking the guard barracks with improvised weapons made from maintenance tools. They moved through the corridors like deadly shadows, using years of suppressed rage to fuel their violence. The Valthari guards were caught completely off guard. They had grown lazy and confident after centuries of easy conquest. None of them expected to be attacked by prisoners they thought were broken animals. The first guards died before they could even sound an alarm. At the same time, Ko Sung-ho and An Da-eun disabled power to 3 entire prison blocks. In the darkness, freed prisoners moved through the ship like ghosts. They opened cell doors, distributed weapons, and freed more prisoners using Yoon Seo's EMP devices. But the humans were not the only ones fighting. Skitter and the other hidden species joined the rebellion immediately. The metal spider creature tore through guard patrols with crystal claws. The energy beings overloaded electrical systems and passed through walls like living lightning. Even some of the supposedly broken Kalari picked up weapons and began fighting. Seo Hee-won led a team to the communications center. They fought past, surprised guards, and took control of the ship's internal communication system. For the first time in years, a human voice spoke over the ship's speakers. "Attention all prisoners," Hye-won announced. "The rebellion has begun. The neural inhibitor network is being shut down. Fight back. Take your freedom." The effect was electric. Throughout the ship, prisoners who had been waiting for years suddenly heard hope. Species that had given up completely began to remember why they had wanted to live. The rebellion spread like wildfire. But the Valthari were not helpless. Elite guards in crystal armor began coordinating counterattacks. They used advanced weapons and superior technology to push back against the prisoner uprising. Energy weapons cut through rebel ranks. Force fields blocked escape routes. The most dangerous response came from Overseer Krexthal, the Valthari commander who controlled the ship. He activated emergency protocols that sealed critical sections and began pumping toxic gas into prisoner areas. Hundreds of rebels collapsed, choking and dying. "We need to reach the main computer core," Tae-ho shouted over the noise of battle. If we can disable the inhibitor network completely, every prisoner on the ship will be free to fight. But the computer core was heavily defended. Valthari guards had set up energy barriers and automated defenses. Getting through would require a sacrifice that Tai-Ho was not sure he could ask for. Moon Junho made the decision for him. The quiet librarian gathered a team of volunteers and charged directly at the main defenses. They knew it was suicide, but they also knew their deaths would create the distraction the rebellion needed. "For everyone who died in these cells," Junho shouted as he ran toward the energy barriers. "For everyone who forgot their own names. For everyone who never made it home." The Valthari weapons cut down the charging prisoners, but their sacrifice worked. While the guards were focused on the direct attack, Tai-Ho and a small team slipped through maintenance tunnels and reached the computer core from behind. Yun Seo worked frantically to break through the computer security while Tai-Ho and Ji-Hoon held off responding guards. Her fingers flew over alien control interfaces, using her engineering knowledge to understand systems designed by completely different minds. "Almost there," she called out as weapon fire exploded around them. "Just need 30 more seconds." But they did not have 30 seconds. More Valthari guards were arriving, including ones with heavy weapons that could blast through any cover. The rebels were about to be overwhelmed. That was when Hyun-Woo arrived with reinforcements. He had fought through half the ship to reach them, leaving a trail of dead guards behind him. His clothes were torn and bloody, but his eyes burned with terrible purpose. "Nobody stops the humans," he snarled, throwing improvised explosives at the advancing guards. "Not today, not ever again." The explosion gave Yunseo the time she needed. Her fingers found the right controls, and suddenly alarms began ringing throughout the ship. Every neural inhibitor on every prisoner went dark at the same time. The change was immediate and devastating. 3,000 prisoners suddenly remembered who they used to be. Warriors, scientists, engineers, artists, all of them trapped for months or years in artificial stupidity. All of them with years of rage and humiliation to repay. The rebellion became a revolution. Freed prisoners poured through the ship like an unstoppable flood. They overwhelmed guard positions, seized weapons, and took control of critical systems. Species that had been enemies before worked together against their common oppressors. Ye Jin led medical teams to treat wounded rebels, while also hunting down guards who had been especially cruel to prisoners. Song Mi-young fought her way to the navigation center and began changing the ship's course. Instead of heading to the Valthari homeworlds, they were now flying toward human space. But the most important change was in the prisoners themselves. They were not just fighting for freedom anymore. They were fighting for revenge against beings who had treated them like animals. The Valthari had created their own nightmare by showing conquered species exactly how merciless they could be. Overseer. Krexthal made his last stand in the bridge, surrounded by his most elite guards. But even crystal armor and energy weapons could not stop thousands of freed prisoners who had nothing left to lose. The battle was brief and brutal. When it was over, Tai-Ho stood in the command center of what had been his prison. Around him, former prisoners worked to control ship systems and tend to their wounded. The Torment's Edge was no longer a prison ship. It was a weapon of liberation flying toward the stars. "What do we do now?" Hyewan asked, looking at the star charts that showed their position. Tai-Ho thought about all the other prison ships in Valthari space. All the slave worlds where captured beings worked until they died. All the species that thought freedom was impossible because the Valthari seemed too powerful to defeat. "Now we teach the galaxy something the Valthari never learned," he said. "We show them what happens when humans break their chains." The screaming had stopped, but the revolution was just beginning. The first target was the slave processing facility orbiting Valthari Prime. Park Chan-woo, who had taken command of the captured ship, studied the massive station through their sensors. Millions of prisoners from hundreds of species were held there, waiting to be distributed to mining worlds and factory planets throughout the Empire. It is heavily defended, reported Song Mi-young from the navigation station. Energy shields, weapon platforms, and at least 50 guard ships. Good, said Hyun-woo, cleaning blood from his improvised weapons. I was hoping they would make this interesting. But Tae-ho had learned important lessons during the prison ship rebellion. This was not just about violence anymore. This was about changing the way the entire galaxy thought about the Valthari Empire. Before we attack, we broadcast, he decided. Every communications array in this system needs to hear our story. Every prisoner needs to know that rebellion is possible. Every guard needs to understand that their victims are fighting back. Seo Hye-won had been working on this broadcast for days. She had interviewed dozens of freed prisoners, collecting their stories of capture, torture, and survival. The message was not just words, it was proof that the Valthari could be defeated. The broadcast began on every frequency the captured ship could reach. Hye-won's voice carried across the star system, speaking in dozens of languages as translation. Systems converted her words for different species. This is the free ship revolution's edge, formerly the prison vessel Torment's edge. We are escaped prisoners of all species. We have broken our chains. We have taken control of our captor's ship. And we are coming to free every slave in Valthari space. The response was immediate. Communication channels lit up with messages from other prison ships, slave facilities, and even some Valthari military vessels. Some messages were from prisoners begging for rescue, others were from guards calling for reinforcements, but many were from beings who had thought freedom was impossible, suddenly hearing that hope was real. Multiple slave facilities are reporting prisoner uprisings, Mi-young announced, monitoring the communications traffic. The broadcast is spreading faster than we expected. This was exactly what Tae-ho had hoped for. The Valthari Empire was built on the idea that conquered species would always submit to superior force. But if prisoners everywhere began fighting back at once, even the mighty Valthari would be overwhelmed. The attack on the processing facility began with Ko Sung-ho and his engineering team disabling the station's shields. They used technical knowledge gained from studying Valthari systems to find weaknesses the aliens did not know existed. When the protective barriers failed, the station was vulnerable to assault. But instead of destroying the facility, the revolutionaries did something unexpected. They docked with the station and began systematically freeing prisoners while fighting through guard positions. It was slower and more dangerous than simply blowing everything up, but it saved millions of lives. Kim Yoo-jin led fighter squadrons made up of former prisoners who remembered their piloting skills. They flew captured Valthari ships against guard vessels, using knowledge of alien technology combined with human creativity and determination. The battles were fierce, but the revolutionaries had advantages their enemies did not expect. Every freed prisoner was fighting for something personal. Every pilot had lost friends or family to Valthari cruelty. Every soldier remembered specific guards who had beaten or humiliated them. This was not just warfare, it was justice. Meanwhile, Shin Bo-ram coordinated communications with uprising prisoners across multiple worlds. Her team had discovered that the Valthari communication network could be used against them. By broadcasting instructions and encouragement to slaves throughout the empire, they turned the aliens' own technology into a weapon of liberation. The most important discovery came from Lim Ye-jin and her medical team. While treating freed prisoners, she realized that the neural inhibitor technology could be reversed. Instead of suppressing minds, the devices could be modified to enhance intelligence and coordination. We can make ourselves smarter and faster, she explained to the command team. The same technology they use to break us can make us stronger than we ever were before. But Tae-ho was cautious about this. We fought to become human again. I do not want us to become something else entirely. Not something else, Ye-jin corrected. Something more. The best of what we always were, without the limitations that held us back. The decision was left to individual choice. Some revolutionaries chose enhancement, becoming faster, smarter, and more capable than baseline humans. Others preferred to remain unchanged, trusting in natural human abilities. Both groups worked together effectively. As revolution spread across Valthari space, the Empire's response became increasingly desperate. They began destroying entire slave facilities rather than allowing prisoners to escape. They used weapons of mass destruction against their own territories. They even started killing Valthari civilians who questioned the war effort. "They are terrified," observed Nam Su-jin during a planning meeting. "For 1,000 years, they have been the predators. Now they are learning what it feels like to be prey." But the revolutionaries were not interested in genocide or total destruction. They wanted justice, not vengeance. When Valthari soldiers surrendered, they were treated as prisoners of war rather than executed. When civilian populations were threatened, the revolutionaries protected them. This confused many alien species who expected humans to be as cruel as their former captors. But Taeho and his people understood something important. If they became monsters while fighting monsters, they would lose the moral authority that made their cause worth fighting for. The final battle came when the revolutionaries reached Earth itself. The planet had been under Valthari occupation for months, with most of the population enslaved or killed. But when the revolution's edge arrived in the solar system, they found something unexpected. Earth had not given up. Underground resistance movements had been fighting constantly. Human military units had been conducting guerrilla warfare from hidden bases. The planet was wounded, but not broken. Lee Soo-hyun, a young woman who had been captured as a teenager, led the Liberation Fleet to Earth's surface. She had spent years in Valthari prisons, but she had never forgotten her home world. Now she was bringing news that would change everything. "People of Earth," she broadcast to the planet below, "this is your children from the outer colonies. We were taken prisoner, but we did not stay prisoners. We learned to fight. We learned to win. And we came home to teach you that humanity is stronger than any chain they can forge." The liberation of Earth took weeks of fighting, but the outcome was never in doubt. Humans who had learned to survive in alien prisons were more than capable of defeating occupying forces on their own world. More importantly, they brought with them allies from dozens of species who had chosen to fight alongside humanity. When the last Valthari garrison surrendered, Taeho stood in the ruins of what had been a prison processing center. Around him, former slaves from across the galaxy worked together to heal the damage and rebuild what had been destroyed. "What happens now?" asked Chan Wu, who had become one of humanity's leading military commanders. Taeho looked up at the sky, where ships from dozens of free species were arriving to help with reconstruction. The galaxy was changing. Species that had been enemies were working together. Civilizations that had given up hope were building new futures. "Now we make sure this never happens again," Taeho said. "We teach the galaxy that freedom is not something you are given. It is something you take and defend every day." The Valthari Empire was finished, but more importantly, a new alliance was beginning. It was built not on conquest or domination, but on the simple idea that no being should ever be chained against their will. And at the center of this alliance were humans, the species that had been dismissed as primitive animals, but had proven that chains could always be broken by those determined to be free. The screams had ended. The healing could begin, but the universe would never forget the lesson learned in the corridors of the torment's edge. Underestimate humanity at your own peril.